It's the silent epidemic of addiction. It's the addiction that is often the last addiction that people will give up, like heroin and meth, and just to pick up sugar and have no idea that they've just picked up another way of playing with their brain chemistry, of self-medicating with substances and doing extraordinary harm to their body and brains at the same time.
Welcome to the Entrepreneurs in Recovery podcast. I am so grateful that you were here. We just passed 51 episodes. So thank you so much for liking, subscribing, supporting the show. Really appreciate you continuing to subscribe on YouTube and leave a review for the show and share this podcast with others. I never thought we would even get to this many episodes. When I first started out, I had a plan that I would do this podcast for as long as it lit me up and gave me some excitement. And, here we are. We're on episode 51. I'm really excited to share with you that my keynote speeches in Indiana, shout out to Clark County Cares, they went really well. And I'm going to do an episode where I talk about these talks, these keynotes, so you can get to know me a little bit better. And this was the first time I delivered on this keynote, which was me sharing my story and really sharing it in a new way, because I have a new understanding with all the time that I've got to spend observing my story, sitting with all of the things that have happened, especially over the last 4 or 5 months in Costa Rica, really being able to sit in this environment and take a good look at the story as I was building the keynote. So I'm really excited to break that down for you all. But today's guest, I'm also really excited to share. Today's guest is Florence Christophers. She is the founder of kicksugarcoach.com. She is the founder of the Kick Sugar Summit. And yes, once again, I have someone on the show who is talking about sugar addiction. We talk about all kinds of fascinating topics, including the root cause of addiction, part of it being sugar. So this is a really fascinating episode. Once again, I'm so grateful to be able to introduce Florence to you all and get to hear her decades of experience in this space as we dive deep into sugar once again. So enjoy the show. Hi, Florence. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this interview. I've been really excited for a little while. We met a couple months ago, and I was just looking through my notes, and I'm like, oh, I cannot wait for this conversation. And, maybe you can also tell us, like, how did you find me? And then we could tell that story, and then we're just going to dive right into your story.
Sure. Yeah. So I definitely reached out to Jesse. I read his book, and then later I discovered that he had a podcast. And then in the context of listening to his podcast, I realized, oh my goodness, he's literally marketing to entrepreneurs who have addictions, which is really, really common. Like, can you be an entrepreneur without an addiction? There probably exists. They're outliers. Most of us have found a way to actually channel that incredible energy that you need to be able to sustain an addiction, and the incredible nervous system that we need to be able to channel that kind of intensity through our nervous system, which happens when we're in addictions, to a business. It's often we're artists, we're entrepreneurs, we're creative thinkers, not always, but often. And so I thought, of course, he has a podcast geared towards entrepreneurs and addiction and in addiction recovery. So I reached out and thought, we should talk. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an addict in recovery, and I loved your book. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think you were talking about, like, the law of attraction, which is what you're into as part of your healing modalities that you're into. And you had picked that up in the book, which I had put down in the book, that type of a vibe in the part of the addiction recovery process. And and I'm sure we're going to get into that today and how that applies to the healing journey, or can apply to the healing journey. But I'd love to start out with letting the audience know your story, like what got you into becoming this well-known, sugar addiction coach, sugar coach, trauma-informed coach in this space. Love to get to know you better.
Sure. So back in my early 20s, I had, from the early childhood, I had terrible headaches and migraines. And then when I was in my teens, I gained weight, I had acne, I was depressed. And then by the time I was in my early 20s, I was a university student. I had fabulous friends. I was involved in student politics. I had a full, active, happy life. And we lived in this old historic house on campus. And I wouldn't say it was party central, but there was a lot of social activity. My life was great. And my roommates and I, there were 4 rooms. So we'd go out on a Friday night and we'd have fun and a blast. And all weekend we'd do what students do. And by Sunday night, I was suicidally depressed. I had blinding migraines and I just couldn't get out of my room. I was just sick. And by Monday morning, all my roommates were ready to go to class at 8 or 9 in the morning. And I'm like, what is going on here? Why am I having such intense reactions to the exact same lifestyle? We all ate pizza, drank Coke, had Cheerios for breakfast. We had like pop and junk food. Like we ate the same, we lived the same. I wasn't even that particularly hard a partier. I barely drank. It triggered such terrible headaches for me. So I was actually the lesser. I was on a less like junky lifestyle path, but I was for sure being hit differently. And one of those dark nights, I was like vomiting. I had a migraine. I was suicidally depressed. I thought, what is going on? Like there's something, my body is like saying something and I don't know what it needs and I don't know what to do. And my in and out of the doctor's offices just led to more prescriptions. And at a certain point you think they're not helping. They're not helping. I don't believe that there's a pill out there that's going to fix this. And then one day I had a friend sent me a copy of a book called The Sugar Blues. And I remember looking at it and thinking, what has this got to do with anything? As if sugar has anything to do with my migraines and my depression. And well, one day when I was sick again and thinking there's got to be something, I remember sort of digging out, I kind of tossed in the back of books in the back of my college room, and I dug it out and I read it in 2 days and I thought, I am awakened. I am so deeply persuaded. So it was written by a man named not a doctor actually, William Duffy, and he makes the most compelling case. If anyone has never read the book, The Sugar Blues, it's a page turner. I found it so. And I knew at the end of the book, this explains it. I am literally eating processed junk foods all day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all my snacks in between. And even though it doesn't affect everybody the same way, it affects me. It deeply is affecting me. So I was completely motivated. I was like, that's it. I'm going to eat whole foods. I'm going to throw out all the junk food. I was the kind of kid that would eat cereal and add, sugary cereal and put sugar on top of it. Like it was, if I couldn't scrape it at the end of the bowl, at the end of the meal, like there wasn't enough sugar in it. So I was a very hardcore sugar junkie. I ate it right from childhood all the way through until I hit my wall in my early 20s. And this book awakened me and I started my journey. And I'd go 3 or 4 days and then I would kind of sort of tremble and have cravings and I'd feel like, oh, I just need to have some. And then it was months and months of being on again, off again, on again, off again, and feeling like, this shouldn't be hard. This should not be hard. I am motivated. I've seen the light. I am persuaded. At the very least, I'm persuaded that if I can break up with sugar and all this processed junk food I eat, that it's worth running the experiment to see if I feel better. If William Duffy was correct, that this is going to create a massive transformation in health and physical health, but I couldn't I couldn't string enough days together to even figure out if the experiment was successful. And I was frustrated. And this was like 1989. There was no internet. There were no books. There was nobody talking about this. It was like me and William Duffy and this ocean of sugar that shows up in all of our food. And at some point I thought, you know what? I think I'm addicted to this stuff. And I started to talk about that. And people would laugh their head off, Jesse. They're like, that's so funny. You can't be addicted to sugar. You need that to live. And people are like, you're being so dramatic, Florence. That's ridiculous. But eventually, I didn't know much about addiction. I had never read anything on it. But I just thought, I don't know, maybe I'm the only person on the planet, but this stuff should not be that hard to give up. I think I'm addicted. And so then I started to sort of look for more supports, more information. And at the back of the book, there was sort of like some references to some other books. And I wrote away to universities and I started to look at the back of those books and wrote away for more studies and research. And at one point I can look in the eye and say, I think if there was anything written on the topic of sugar and sugar addiction, I had read. I had sourced it, I had pulled it in. And at some point I had a bit of a folder. It wasn't much, but it was little snippets of scientific studies that had been done that show that sugar is an opiate, that it absolutely operates like an opiate in the brain. And I'll tell you about one of my favorite studies that I just thought, this this is an opiate. This substance can be addictive, like alcohol or nicotine or drugs, and I'm addicted. And so at one point I decided to go away and do my master's on the topic. So I rode away to Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland, where a girlfriend of mine had gone and done her master's and had this marvelous experience. So I thought, I want to go there too. So I applied with the thesis that I wanted to explore the potential that sugar can be addictive and that it might be implicated in eating disorders in women, because I could see this whole thing unfolding in my own life. They accepted me into the program, and I got over there and they're like, okay, kiddo, like, show us your research. What have you got here? This is a very interesting topic. And I said, oh my gosh, let me share all this with you. So I shared all these little snippets, but in particular, I shared a study in 1968 in Laval University, Montreal. Some scientists, I don't even know why they would even think to study this, but they had taken some mice and had subjected them to separation distress, where they take it away from the mother. And when they took these babies away from the mother, they peeped about 300 times in a minute. So, just their equivalents of cries. And then they gave them sugar, and that dropped to 75. And they're like, really interesting. It seems to be acting like a painkiller of some kind, both emotionally and potentially physically. But we won't know for sure if sugar is acting, white refined sugar is acting like an opiate, unless we put naltrexone into these baby mice, which blocks the effects of opiates. And if we do not see a reduction back to 75, it stays steady at 300, we can safely conclude that at least this study proposes that sugar is an opiate. And it's exactly what happened. They put the naltrexone in and it stayed steady. So at the end of this paper, so I was showing them this. I'm like, see, I'm really onto something here. And they basically said, no. There's no evidence to suggest that sugar is harmful or that it's addictive. You're going to need to pick another topic. So I was pretty disappointed, but I've been so interested in this topic literally from my 20s. But it wasn't until about 10 years ago when slowly there were books coming on the market, more and more people were talking about it. It was hitting the mainstream news. And I was like, I knew before anybody knew. But what really caught my attention was a documentary that came out of Australia by a man named Damon Gameau. And he was kind of a bit of a celebrity, and he did this big budget, beautiful film with musicals and, just a beautiful production. It was called That Sugar Film. And he showed his journey of getting onto sugar, what it did to his body, and then withdrawing off it. And then he went around and interviewed people around the world, particularly in America. And at one point, in the middle of the film, he's going into a small town community somewhere in, I think, the Midwest. I could be wrong. And there was an 18-year-old kid that has Mountain Dew in his baby bottle. Have you ever seen the film?
No.
Oh, wow. So they put Mountain Dew in the baby bottles of children right from birth. They are sucking back Mountain Dew in their baby bottles. And this kid's teeth, no surprise, this man has a mobile dental van. He just goes through these small communities taking people's teeth out because they're so rotten. They've been on sugar for so long, right from birth, practically. And this kid this 18-year-old had just lost all of his teeth because they'd all rotted out of his head. And so Damon goes up to him and says, dude, okay, now that you know that you've lost all your teeth because they rotted because of the sugar, are you going to stop drinking sugar or Mountain Dew? And I grabbed the remote and I paused and I looked at Sean and I thought, he doesn't get addiction. He does not have any idea what he's asking this kid. He doesn't understand what you're in an addiction. You don't just go, oh yeah, okay, well, this bad thing happened. I guess I'll just give it up now. So I said to him, I love that the world's talking about sugar, the harms of sugar, but it's not fair to the world to also say, well, why don't you just give it up, right? Many of us are going to find ourselves in a tangle with it, otherwise known as addiction. And so I thought, I'm going to do one of those little summit things where we can actually talk about the addiction piece of this so that people can be informed that it's the silent epidemic of addiction. It's the addiction that is often the last addiction that people will give up, like heroin and meth and really, really, really hard addictions, and just to pick up sugar and have no idea that they've just picked up another way of playing with their brain chemistry, of self-medicating with substances and doing extraordinary harm to their body and brains at the same time.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I feel like poking the bear with this is a big one because You think about treatment centers for addiction, treatment centers, and the foods that they have at treatment centers and what they're eating, and they're drinking the sodas and pizza and all the stuff. And it's like, yeah, but I quit fentanyl. Yeah, but I quit alcohol. But I wonder what it's actually doing, the ultra processed foods, for the long term effects on their immune system, on their brain, on their neurochemistry. And it's to me, it's kind of mind blowing that we do not look at that. Like, we don't go, hey, we need to change these foods, but we'll detox you. We'll teach you the 12 steps. We'll give you some of these, CBT, get a therapy, all these different things, but we don't talk about the nutrition side. So what do you find with that in that sort of sector and industry? I'm sure that you've been exposed to it or had loved ones. Like, how do you feel like about that, about the foods that they're serving?
Absolutely, Jesse. So first of all, I actually don't think it's an overstatement to say that sugar is a form of trauma. Why? Because the definition of trauma, if it comes out of sort of like the somatic world or the trauma healing world, we understand trauma now to be not about an event. It's about it's a physiological state of overwhelm. So when the event overwhelms our nervous system, we fall into something called the freeze response, where we feel helpless and hopeless and depressed. And that freeze response and the trauma response and the word overwhelm, same. You can use them interchangeably. So sugar, what sugar does is it comes in, it completely overwhelms. I mean, it might take time, and certainly it's dose dependent. But when we're over consuming sugar, eventually it literally stuns our mitochondria. There's 8 different ways that sugar damages our metabolism and our brain health. As as Dr. Robert Lustig in his book Metabolical lays out, just lays the science out. It's untouchable. So we know that when enough sugar comes in over enough time, it literally overwhelms the body. And when a body is overwhelmed, it's more likely to narrow its capacity to stay present to our sensations, to our feelings, to things happening in our life. So we're already overwhelmed internally. So we're more easily overwhelmed with things outside of us. Our capacity for stress resilience, to show up, to have energy, to move through life just becomes shrunk. And that's just internally, right? And then we could be facing all kinds of external overwhelm as well. So it doesn't help that when the substances we're consuming, the food we're consuming is nutrient deficient, it's overwhelming and damaging and toxic to the cells, that we have even less capacity to sort of overcome other sort of childhood traumas, developmental trauma, life overwhelm, stresses. So, I mean, just wanted to start right there, that if you don't understand what trauma is, if you just think, oh, we just need to go back in time and to heal past events and memories and work with the unconscious and all good work, but if you don't understand the role that trauma is playing and shrinking your capacity to do that work, you're missing a huge piece of the recovery puzzle. The other piece, that I did have a loved one who was addicted to alcohol, was dabbling with drugs, very much heading in the wrong direction. And we were making some phone calls to find recovery centers. And every single recovery center I called, I asked about the food, and not one of them was awakened around it. No, it's healthy. It's really great. Is it gluten? Is there gluten-free options? Is there sugar-free options? Oh, no, don't be silly. Like, no, people need to be able to eat sandwiches and pizza and their favorite foods. They're in recovery. And I'm just like, you don't get it. How much faster and more stable a foundation their recovery will be on when they're feeding their bodies and their brains high quality nutrition that can repair the brain more quickly and more surely, because sometimes you can't repair your brain without adequate. Well, you cannot repair your brain without adequate nutrition. So you can be sober and miserable. You can be sober and sick. You can be sober and still be wandering around with profound feelings of overwhelm and despair. And
Yeah, you got me thinking about. So we talked about offline a little bit about the evolution of someone's journey, and it doesn't have to be addiction recovery journey. It could be a human journey, and eventually the human journey comes to a point where you have to face trauma, that you've had trauma at some point in your life. Some have had extreme trauma and PTSD, and some have had some type of life trauma. And I think we're both sort of in a place where we're really working on that part of ourselves and been doing that for a little bit of time. But I didn't understand any of this stuff really early on. Like I knew there was things that happened to me that were important, but I'm really curious. Do you think that part of the foods, the ultra processed foods that are eaten in addiction recovery at treatment centers are actually blocking your cells from healing trauma. It's almost like a coping mechanism to not look at the trauma.
I think it can complicate it. I think there's certain progress that can be made, but I think that it's night and day with the kind of progress that could be made if you're looking at the nutrition piece. When the foods that we're eating are malnourishing, there's not enough adequate nutrition. For many of us that come out of backgrounds of childhood abuse, neglect, abandonment, we are more quickly stressed. Our nervous system goes, it activates more quickly. We stay stressed longer. It takes less to get us stressed. And many of us have a developmental pattern of dropping into the freeze response where we just feel collapsed. And people know what I'm talking about when they know that. And so for this traumatized nervous system, we are burning through nutrition at way higher rates than the average person. Way higher. We burn through B vitamins more quickly, vitamin C more quickly, minerals more quickly. So much of mental illness issues, mental health issues now are very much tied to metabolic health. And the whole metabolic psychiatry movement of Dr. Georgia Ede and Dr. Chris Palmer, we're now seeing the brain health and mental health totally connected. The brain health and mental health we're talking about the same thing. And when a brain is well nourished, mental health issues can completely go into remission. And I'm talking schizophrenia, even bipolar, and depression, anxiety, just through nutritional interventions, not CBT, not somatic experiencing, not like meditate, none of it, just through nutrition. Dr. George Ede brought in nutritional ketosis into our practice, and the most stunning transformations have happened. There's a website called Metabolic Mind, and it's being funded by the founder of Roblox, and they're funding research. So if you're interested in this space, they are literally giving out grants to scientists to study why. Why does the ketogenic diet, why does high quality nutrition, whole foods, put addiction and I meant to say mental health issues, but also addiction to some extent into remission in and of itself. So it isn't to say that those other modalities aren't helpful. They are, and they're needed in many cases. But if you're missing this powerful lever, you're making it harder for your clients in these. And some of them, Jesse, kid you not, are charging $25,000 a day. It's hard to believe, but true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt. Yeah, there's a lot of money to be made. It's a big money industry. And, when you follow the money, it's not hard to see why sugar is protected. It's a protected addiction. It's big food, big pharma. It's a really huge industry, $1 trillion easy. And so it makes sense why it's not a hyper focus. And that's why we have people like you, Dr. Gabor Mate, Peter Levine, talking about like addiction is the norm, folks. Wake up. We live in an abnormal society. You're born into addiction, and food is a big part of that. And I've talked about my journey with that in the show before. And I think that, if you follow the money, you can really understand. We're looking at the skyrocket levels of suicide, mental health decline, addiction, post-COVID. It's not like, so I look at that as we're not really looking at in the right places. And one of the biggest places, especially for ADHD, ADD, like food and ADHD, maybe we could talk about that. It's like, we're not understanding the chemicals that are in these foods, these ultra processed foods, are the source in many ways of what's happening at the center of the autoimmune disease, at the center of ADHD, at the center of all of these things, which are leading to, and you even brought it to, they can be even traumatic, the food. So yeah,
and I can even share the science on that. So here's how it works. So there are substances that come into our body that are chemicals that are highly processed, ultra processed, that can be either excitatory to the neurons. So sugar is very excitatory. It makes the cells kind of spark a bit. There's a real rush of fast burning fuel coming in, and they get all very excited. And they can either burn out like dopamine receptor sites. And once those receptor sites burn out and they commit cell death, they never come back. Those are the only neurons in our brains that do not replenish. But the others potentially could be replenished or repaired. But what happens, there's substances like MSG, sugar, caffeines, those stimulants, they can come in and they can excite our cells, and we can get a lift in serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. And then there's a down regulation and a drop. And so we're on this roller coaster with our moods and our blood sugars. But there's also the case that with mental health, metabolic health, when we're constantly running on glucose and we're eating these fast burning processed carbs, there's a flush of sugar that floods our bloodstream, crosses over into the brain. There's a bit of a lift. People feel more social, just like alcohol, right? There's this sense of just having a bit more energy, feeling more social, feeling a sense of happiness or well-being, and then you crash. And then over time, of course, the highs are less high and the lows are low and they last longer until, God help us, we wind up at anhedonia. When the cells in the brain are not, and then what happens is the brain can become insulin resistant. And when the cells are not getting enough fuel, then you wind up with hypomania states like depression, or you can wind up with hypermania states where there's too much energy coming to the cells, and you might wind up with anxiety or mania, or sometimes like hallucinations or psychosis. So the fuel going into the brain and its access to steady, high quality fuel completely impacts whether the cells are hyper responding or hypo responding. And when some cells hyper respond, others will hypo respond. So you can wind up with someone who has depression and anxiety oscillating. Brain health. So the beautiful thing about something like, let's say, nutritional ketosis or even high quality whole foods is that when you get off the ultra-processed foods that are creating these wild blood sugar swings, nutritional deficiencies, and these swings in energy that floods our cells and then retreats, leaving us with a crash, is that steady fuel creates steady moods, and those steady moods resource you so that you can do the deeper recovery work that all humans have to do, but you just have this steady metabolic base in which to do it. But when you're still swinging and you're having cravings, your cravings drop off on whole foods. It's phenomenal. I interviewed a guy named Dr. Brian Lenskis out of San Diego. This might be TMI, I don't know, but it just popped to mind. He was telling about, he's like, Florence, I tell you, I can't believe the things I'm seeing in my practice. I get people off all the ultra processed foods, the junk foods, the sugars. I get them onto paleo, low carb, quality meat and vegetables and healthy fats, and, lay low on, grains, and just as a nutritional intervention. He said they come back and they're like, Doc, I've never felt better. I've lost, 28 pounds. He goes, but the weirdest thing, I have zero interest in pornography now. He's like,
That's exactly where I was going to go next. Yep.
Right? Like I didn't do anything. I like growth. Like what? Yep. Right? So they're so tied. They're so tied.
Yeah. So you literally read my mind. So, you think about the DSM, and for those who've listened, hopefully you've listened to the podcast before. If you haven't, that's the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual they use in diagnosing mental illnesses or mental health disorders. And pornography addiction, internet pornography addiction, not included, and not sugar addiction either. So let's talk about that. We're living in a clown world, in my opinion, and I got the receipts for that, because the fact that I can go to my phone right now and I can click a button and I can access the most hardcore graphic scenes in pornography instantly. But if I wanted to access holistic health nutrition, figuring out how I can actually live my best life with these special foods, I can't find that. It's very fettered. It's very preoccupied with confusing, even sugary cereals are healthy. Like, it's like, wait, how am I supposed to use the food pyramid? It says that what is it? Lucky Charms is more healthier than a steak or something. I don't know, something crazy like that. It's really comical. And I look at, the world of internet pornography has been a real passion of mine since 2014. I've been on that journey of really trying to understand, why is the draw so incredibly powerful? It's because it's a super normal stimulus. It's just like when I was doing cocaine, it can act just like that in the brain. And I think about, sugar addiction. It's not in the DSM. It's not part of it. It's like, it's so comical to me that trauma is also not part of that. It's like, we don't have things that have been researched for decades that are now starting to come up, show their head. Because why? Let's just say it's psychedelic assisted therapy. There's these things showing the potentials of what happens in some of those journeys. And some of it is people getting to the root of their childhood trauma. or young adult trauma. So it just isn't so interesting, the links and the tide of the ties between the things that are so obvious. That's how you know it's the truth. Anything that's very obvious and common sense is usually truth. And we ignore the common sense stuff to look at the deeper addicts who have fentanyl addiction. And it's like, are you kidding me? It's the internet pornography. It's the processed foods. It's the not recommending being out in the sun and getting into the grass, into nature. It's like common sense things we've been doing for eons. And that's kind of how you know. It's like right in front of our eyes, and it's not hidden.
Yeah, it reminds me that I think we very, very tremendously underestimate the power of those simple lifestyle changes. Totally underestimate the power of them to heal so much of our lives. Sleep, exercise, sunshine, nature, good food, whole foods, hyperhydration, simple things that can totally turn around medical conditions that you think, oh no, this is serious, this is right. I have schizophrenia. There's a woman who has a podcast that was called Living with Schizophrenia. She went on nutritional ketosis, worked with Dr. Georgia Eade. She's a part of the Metabolic Mind community. And she had to change the name of her podcast to Living Without Schizophrenia. She's been in remission for 4 years now. No breakthrough episodes, absolutely no signs of, she's fully in remission. She just changed her diet. Plus the other sort of basic self-care things that we underestimate the power of them to heal us, but we vastly overestimate the pharmaceutical solutions. Like, I just got to go to my doctor. I got to get the right pill. I mean, I did that in my 20s until I stopped thinking, I don't think they have an answer. Thank God I found a book that put me on the path of holistic health.
What do you think about? Yeah, we'll share that resource of that book, because I'm interested in that as well. I think, what I'm seeing today is people getting on things like Ozempic. Like, what is your take on using the pharmaceuticals as a way for weight loss and cutting back on weight?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a bell curve of people who benefit from them. They have very little negative side effects, and they lose their appetite, and then they stop eating the junk food and they lose their weight. So if we could find an intervention that allows them to stop eating the junk food so that they can lose the weight and they can get the health benefits of the whole foods that they'll be eating instead, I think that's a superior approach. But we are not informed enough to help those, to diagnose and to properly treat individuals that have food addiction or ultra fast food addiction. We just think we don't know why they can't stop. Hello, addiction. And there are, addiction treatment models that work, and we just have to apply it to food addiction somewhat uniquely to some extent, because like sex addiction, or I don't know, other addictions that you need to navigate. There's no plug in the jug, never to use it again. We still have to navigate a relationship with sex. We still have to navigate a relationship with food, for the rest of our lives. But still, the principles, the core principles of how to recover from an addiction hold. And we know what to do. We just aren't diagnosing people. Do you have the criteria of ultra processed food? Great. You're going to need nutrition and addiction recovery support. So go here for that support. And then they might not need Ozempic. They might not need it, right?
Well, and that's the thing is, if you're going to the doctor for nutrition advice, that's tough, because, how many years of nutrition school did they go to? Not even 1 year, some not even at all. So I think it's, part of the 12 years, 14 years, the schooling and their, all of the work they have to do, and their everything they have to do with the hands-on training. How much is in actual nutrition? It's not much. So it would make sense that it's like, I'm going to my doctor because I have high blood pressure and I need to look at what's happening here. And, I've had my own mother tell me, like, oh, my doctor said, Weight Watchers and eating, a couple Oreos, but watching it on is safe. It's like, that's like saying a little shot of fentanyl is safe if I do just a little bit. To me, it's the same thing. It's that extreme, because you're looking at the obesity epidemic. You're looking at children. You're looking at what's happening in the United States, the statistics. And it's like, what is the root cause of this? And obviously, we got to look at like what's happening in the center aisles of the supermarket, which also gets into another thing that I'm curious about is, how does someone who can't afford to eat whole foods, let's just put this out there, right? That's a big thing, is the financial piece. Anytime I talk about eating organic or eating different ways of being, a lot of people say, I can't afford that. I can't do that. It's not possible. So what would you say to someone who, is looking to eat healthy, start to work on their food addiction, and especially for their children? How could they get started with that?
Yes, what a great question. And it's true. And the cost of groceries post-COVID are stunning. Like, I've been pretty immune to price at the till for most of my life. I knew that I needed to buy the right food or I was going to have migraines and depression and go back to how I was before. But I'm getting to the tail going, oh my Lord, are you kidding? What the heck did I just buy? So it's worse than ever in terms of the pressure on our budgets in terms of buying quality food. So I would say there's two things you can do. One, you can up your fat, which can be an affordable way of sort of bringing in more satiety, so you wind up needing to eat less. The other thing you can do, as long as it's a whole food, you can do beans in bulk. Not everyone can process them. Some of them are still too carby for some people, but generally speaking, is anyone going to die of eating beans? No. Is anyone going to die of eating any whole food? No. They might not lose weight. They might not get a full metabolic health repair, but just start with bulk whole foods. Like, if you're buying meat, buy it in the biggest possible portion, and maybe it's not organic and maybe it's not free range yet. But yeah, I mean, that's the obvious, just buy bulk and bump your fat, and you might find your satiety growing. What makes us voraciously hungry, to compulsive overeaters, constantly grazing and snacking and wasting money on junk food that does nothing for our nutritional status, is snacking and the junk food. Like, we just can't get enough of it. We're not being nourished, and the body knows it. If you get enough protein, your appetite can drop. So I don't know that there's really an easy answer.
Let's talk about the fat. So, like, what kind of fats would you recommend someone consume?
Really, really good question. So ultra processed foods, those center aisles, like you said, is not just sugar and flour and refined processed junk foods with artificial flavors, colors, chemicals, but there's seed oils, and there's 8 of them. It's called the Hateful Eight. And one of the best books on this is called Dark Calories from Dr. Kate Shanahan. And the 8 are, I hope I can get them right, sunflower oil, safflower oil, soybean oil, canola oil,
Rapeseed oil.
Rapeseed oil. Anyway, if you go into your grocery store and you see a bottle of clear oil, don't touch it. It is as bad as sugar. And part of the reason is, it's highly, 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 highly processed. It's so toxic. But what happens is our bodies need fats to burn. And when those highly refined, ultra processed oils come into our body and they're stored as fat, when the body breaks down fat for fuel, it's like, what do I do with this? It's so high in omega-6. And omega-6, which we do need some of, but it's so concentrated in omega-6 that it actually creates oxidation at the cellular level, at the mitochondria level. So the mitochondria are sputtering to make good quality energy from it. And then what happens is, because it's not getting good quality fat to burn for fuel, we start getting these sugar cravings, and then we start eating sugar, and it's this vicious cycle. So you're so right. Avoid the inner aisles, just produce, fat. Healthy fats are avocados, cold pressed extra virgin olive oils. Macadamia oils is probably fine. Nuts and seeds, the fat on quality meat, just stick with those.
So you've worked with a lot of people, right? You've worked with a lot of people over the many, many years you've been doing this work and been passionate about it because of your own journey. Like, what have you discovered when it comes to food addiction, when it comes to ultra processed foods? I mean, you must see the worst of the worst and the most intense, because I have friends who have recovered. They're in their own food addiction recovery program. I have many people who are just not going to look at that area of their life. So what have you discovered over the years of working with food addiction and processed foods? Like, what do people do? How do they get started with this process?
Sure. So I think one of the things that's really helpful for people to understand is the diagnostic tool for diagnosis any substance abuse disorder perfectly qualifies for food addiction. Really, we're calling it ultra processed food addiction now. And there is a huge movement right now underway to get it into the DSM and the ICD, so the European equivalent of the DSM, because once it's in there, Once it's in there, then doctors can screen for it and they can diagnose, and then they can go and send them hopefully to treatment centers that are covered. This doesn't all have to be paid for out of pocket at the individual level. Plus, it's validating when a doctor says, hey, I suspect maybe there might be ultra processed food addiction in play here. Why don't we just do this diagnostic sort of quiz and assess whether or not you qualify, and then we'll go and sort of refer you to qualified treatment centers. So the first thing we need to understand about ultra processed food addiction, sugar addiction, is that you're going to see continued use despite known adverse consequences. We're going to see the escalation of consumption. We're going to see withdrawal symptoms when you stop. So when you stop eating sugar for 3 to 5 days, do you get headaches? Are you cranky? Do you have cravings? Are you tired? I actually have had clients, their hands shake, just like we see it in mice and rats. When we get them hooked on sugar and then we take them off, their paws tremor. Like all of the rodent studies, all of the animal studies looking at, is sugar addictive? 100%, not a single exception has any study come out with any other conclusion that it appears to act just like any other substance of use and abuse. Cocaine, alcohol, same. So there's a very clear criteria for any addiction, and three S's of the list of about 10 or 11, depending on the criteria, is enough to say, okay, I'm dealing with addiction, which means there's been a neurological, physiological adaptation to the substance, which means that when we put it in our bodies, we quickly and intensely respond to it. So if no one is ever going to get addicted to an Oreo cookie if, there might be a pleasant effect the next day or an hour later, or it's just a mild, that's for us. If we have an addiction to it, it's quickly and it's intensely and it's noticeable, and our body's like, oh yeah, that makes me feel better. That dials down the pain. It is acting like an opiate, like a painkiller, or that gives me energy. There's some sort of biochemical neurological shift that happens. And that when we try and take it away, there is significant withdrawal symptoms and can include anxiety and depression, just like any other substance of use and abuse. So that's the first thing we need to know. And then in terms of recovery, it's the same journey. And one of the pieces that I loved about your book that's very unique, I think, in the addiction recovery space is the role that the law of attraction has to play in recovery. That I think it's harder to do recovery without working with the core principles of understanding that visualizing our success in our mind before we try and duke it out day to day, like trying to stay out of the cupboard, trying to just eat our whole foods. It's harder. Using affirmations, understanding that we don't have to do this alone, that there's spiritual, unseen, visible help of our own understanding that can viscerally come in and line things up. And that's the essence of the law of attraction, and that we are not alone. Eureka, we do not have to do this alone. And I don't mean in the same sense as the 12-step model, which is you need to surrender to a higher power and turn your will and your life over. In fact, I think it's a 180 from that. I think it's that we don't need to turn anything over. You are unbelievable. You're a powerful spiritual being that has the capacity to step into a future that you have visualized, you have felt, you have called in, you have created, and you've worked like a dog to work with the unconscious blocks. So that's the other piece of recovery. You need to know what abstinence is for you, and that it is a very powerful tool in addiction recovery. That if we don't eat the substance, our addiction goes into remission. It doesn't mean we're recovered. It just means that that piece of the equation is dealt with. Next, we need to look at our mind. How do we work with our mind? And then how do we work with our nervous system and our trauma and our unconscious patterns? Because that's 95% of what's running the show. And if we don't have a way of effectively, working with them, because when we put our addictions down, when I say to my clients, when we put our food down, our stuff's going to come up. And if you don't know how to meet and greet it, you don't know how to be with it, you don't know how to be somatically engaged with it in your body, and to work with your mind to look at the negative thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and behaviors that are running the show, you're just going to go back. The likelihood of relapse is so high. Yeah. So all these tools, they work for food addiction as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting in this new age, sort of, it's almost becoming something else now, but like this new age, and people hear the law of attraction, they get triggered. But if you look back to biblical principles and before the Bible, it's been there. And, some of these quotes directly from the Bible that Jesus said, therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe you have received it and it'll be yours. That's literally the law of attraction. It's like, I
Totally.
already know it exists. I know abundance exists. I know addiction recovery exists. I know a life beyond anything that I could have imagined exists. And it's universal principles. It's not just the law of attraction, woo woo. I mean, this has been for eons, these principles have been here. And we're just really, we're finding ways to share with new generations of how to express through words. But it's always been there. So yeah, I mean, that and purpose. I mean, having a purpose alongside that is so important. And I think that that's what I find with entrepreneurs. The most success I've seen with entrepreneurs who struggle with addiction is there's a sense of purpose. It's heading someplace. Like me not consuming in the same way and changing my lifestyle is heading to a purpose of some sort of me doing this. And that purpose could be for them to be a speaker someday, to share about it, even though they're 9-figure earners in another sector. They're like, wow, I really like this journey of healing my childhood trauma. And but like, I appreciate what's happening because now I'm emanating this person who can help people in other ways. And I find that sense of purpose. What have you found with entrepreneurs that's been really helpful with food addiction and recovering from it?
Wow, I love what you were just saying there. So I actually think that everyone has the exact same purpose. Do you want me to share what it is?
Please. Yeah.
I think we have the exact same purpose. Every single human being, we've come down here to create. We've come down here to follow pure desires. We've come down here to follow our bliss. Now everyone's bliss and the desires and the things that light us up and the things that sort of compel us forward. But we're all here to, if you're wondering what your purpose is, that's what it is. Everyone's the same. We have this opportunity to come down as a soul, to partner with the body and to go, all right, let's have some fun. What do I want to do? What would light me up? What would bring me joy? What would bring me peace? What would bring me satisfaction of creative expression? And it's all going to be different how that gets expressed. It's the same damn purpose. Don't complicate it. And it can shift what brings us bliss and what we feel called to do. That can shift. It's never just like, oh, I was born to go and be an addiction recovery coach. No, I was here to come and discover that I live in a very responsive universe, that I am unequivocally a soul. And I'm a spirit, and that my spirit self can connect to source and the quantum field, and there's unlimited possibilities of things that I can manifest and co-create. And when we know that, we understand that we can't do any of that co-creation without a beautiful relationship with our body, with other people, with our environment, with our planet. And we can't move forward without a beautiful relationship with the parts of us inside, because the body is always a multiplicity of perspective. And I always use the example of, if I go outside, I mean, it's a freaking cold day here in Canada. And if I go outside with one hand in a glove and another hand that, I dropped that glove and it's exposed and it's cold. And this hand is having fun. It's comfortable and wants to keep walking. And this hand is like, no, let's go home. This is horrible. I'm miserable. It's the same body. It's just different points of view, different experiences. So we have these parts of us that we can get this body wisdom from, and we can form relationships to. It's all relational. And we figure out pretty quickly that I can't stay in my addiction. I can't keep poisoning my body, driving it beyond its capacity, skimping on sleep, not getting outside to connect in nature, and expect my life to be good. So we go, okay, truce. I'm going to stop the addiction. And then I'm going to start connecting to my body, start listening to the trailheads, which are sensations. What is that activation I feel in my chest right now? Oh, there's something heavy and dark there. And we learn how to slowly go in and be with it and come out, be with it and come out. And then eventually we can listen to it and dialogue with it. And then we can have its memories come up. And we can re-script those memories. We can integrate those memories. We can rewrite those memories. We're healing our trauma. And the whole freaking system starts to integrate and flow, and we start elevating our emotions. We start elevating our consciousness. And every human being's on that journey. As addicts, we have no choice. If we want what we really want, which is abstinence or recovery or freedom, our soul is just kicking our ass to make sure that we do the work that we need to do to get that, or we can't have it. But I just think that's every person's journey, really.
Yeah, you got me thinking about, like, why is the obesity epidemic so rampant now? Why is this happening? And I look at it and I go, yeah, of course we can point towards the foods, but what about the insides? What about the trauma that's happened collectively, not just maybe because I meet so many people, like, I've never had trauma before, and I'm like, yeah, maybe, but there's collective trauma that you're picking up, and then you see people who are overweight or obese, and it's like, how much of that eating is simply for the collective stress and trauma they feel from the people around them, and they're taking it on as, and they don't even have to be an empath or highly sensitive soul, but like they're picking it up and they're eating, and it's going right to the sacral chakra. It's going right to these areas that are of comfort, right? Like that's the feeling center, is the sacral. So it's like, that's where the belly is getting, protection from food. What do you think about that and that whole side of it?
Totally. I totally agree. I don't think there's anyone on the planet that it probably would come into our world anyways that doesn't have trauma. Trauma is just a state of overwhelm. It's a physiological state where your body has lost hope that it can fight or flight its way out of a threat. We have to-do lists that don't end. We have stress that's unending. Too much for too long can be overwhelming to the body, and we just crash. It's trauma, and it can be something that you don't understand what it is. So you think, oh, well, trauma is just children that were sexually abused or war or something. But it diminishes it, our understanding of it and how to work with it and how to work with each other with it when we think it's just about horrific events. It's really about what's happening at the level of the nervous system. And so for all of us, we all need to have a better understanding of what is going on inside. And instead of fighting or flighting away from it, which is over busy, workaholism, addictions, distractions, scrolling, porn, like all that stuff. It's just pulling. It's a running away from the sensations of what's going on inside, which some of it is ours, our own lived experience, and like you're saying, some of it's just collective or legacy burdens, things that are passed down through genetic. But we all have to do this work. I'll have to do this work. And it's beautiful work. I actually liked your word when you said that guy said, I like doing this work because it feels intimate and beautiful and interesting and rich and meaningful. It's as meaningful as forming a relationship with our own selves and our own inner world and what's going on in there as it could be to be meeting and dating and falling in love and building friendships with people outside. It feels the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just a fascinating, I feel like societally, collectively, we're sort of being forced into looking at the shadow, the collective shadow, our own shadow. And COVID really, really did a number on people. A lot of people lost their life because there is so much of us having to go into the inside and couldn't escape out externally. And I love Peter Levine's quote. He says, trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. So when I think about the things that have happened to me, a lot of it was just the absence of an empathetic witness, being there and processing what just happened. And, some of my deepest healing journeys have come with just having someone who can hold that space, or skilled therapist, a coach, a friend that really can hold that space where I can process this stuff and realize, like, oh my God, like that did happen to me. And then not gaslighting my own reality, not gaslighting like it did happen to me. And then going through that process of someone as an empathetic witness, just holding space, not trying to diagnose or trying to heal me. I just be there by that presence, and that's been really, really powerful. And I can understand when it comes to food addiction, it's like, there's so much stress happening, so much financial stress. There's so many stressors that come upon us. It's like I could just go to the cabinet and just grab that bag of chips. It's just instant relief. It's instantly relieving what is going on in the inside. So it's like, for people to have what I would say is probably the most prevalent addiction in the world, food addiction. I can't think of something unless we're going to get like into the mind addictions. I think those are
Right.
probably emotional mind addictions, but those are underneath, right? That's the external is the food. What's going on internally is the emotional addictions. And underneath that is the root, which is fear, which is the root could be under that, could be trauma. And so,
Yes.
yeah, I
Yes.
mean, it's
Yes.
such a hard one, isn't it? I mean, you got like at night, and I know so many people, I know a lot of people with food addiction. So I'm just speaking from, very close people in my life. And I know that like, it's really hard to go a night without like some popcorn or something just to just I had a day, I want to process, I want to not feel these emotions. I don't want to feel the stress. So, um, what what does the future look like? How do we change this?
Well, there's two potential paths. Well, I think there's lots of potential paths. I'm going to kind of highlight two. So, the classic 12-step approach to addiction is anybody can do anything for 24 hours. So, just for today, just eat your whole foods. So, we call it the 3 meal miracles. Eat 3 meals, whole foods only, no snacks. I have something called the sane eating protocol where you schedule your meals. You know what you're going to have the next day. Like a mom that's on her job would have her kids' meals planned the next day. So you schedule it, you abstain. The 4 things that we need to abstain from typically when we have ultra processed food addiction is sugar, flour, sweeteners, and alcohol. I would add seed oils to that actually as well, because any ultra processed food, but those are the big 4 that tend to really, really kick up our cravings. And compulsive eating. So abstain. The N stands for no snacking. That's almost always emotional eating. Now, if you're really, really starving and you need a little mini meal, that's different. But for generally speaking, you should be eating enough at every meal that you can go from one meal to the next. And if you're a little bit hungry before lunch, you can say to your body, honey, there's another meal coming. I got it planned. You saw me plan it last night. It's going to be beautiful. We're going to have salmon and salad and steamed asparagus and half an avocado. And oh my God, isn't this going to be great? It's coming. So we train our bodies. We're not on diets anymore. We eat abundantly beautiful whole foods. It will take at least 28 days to fall in love with them. For some people, it's quicker, but your body one day will prefer those foods. You just have to be steady. So the classic 12-step approach is get whatever support you need, hang by a thread, chew your knuckles, whatever you need to do, just get through one day at a time until it becomes automatic and it flows. Your body falls in love with whole foods and you've got enough community support that you can sustain it. That's one approach. Then there's the rational recovery approach. And Jack Trimpey has a slightly different, well, no, maybe not slightly, he would say dramatically different, but different approach where it's kind of like an early form of parts work, where he calls it the addictive voice recognition technique. And it's not a one day at a time approach. It is a one and done approach where you realize that I'm ambivalent about my use and abuse of food. Ultra processed foods. There's a part of me that loves it, finds it incredibly comforting. I've been using it since a very young child. It's affordable, it's everywhere, it's acceptable. Come on, it's not so bad to eat chips. Like, okay, right? That part doesn't want to give it up. It wants to be able to use those levers as needed when there's something going on inside our system that needs to be responded to quickly with food. But then there's this other part that's like, we're done. We're done. I am overweight. I'm depressed. I have acne. I am diabetic. I'm pre-diabetic. I have mental health. Like, we're done. I have awakened. I will never see those foods as anything but self-harming. And I'm so uncomfortable and full of tension and self-disgust that I'm continuing to harm myself in this way that we're done. So Jack will say, great. You have 2 minds. You take the part that is the big picture, the true self, the higher mind, the rational mind, the neocortex, or however you want to frame it. It sees the truth and it has to unblend from the little part. He calls it the beast. I call it the sugar dragon. And when it starts want about having a donut or going to the cupboard and getting potato chips, you're like, no, you have absolutely no power. You're just a voice in my head. You suggest, you justify, you manipulate, you put up cravings and images, and you're powerless, honey. It's over. The gig's over. I see right through you. You can't move my limbs. You got nothing. I call it the do nothing approach to addiction recovery. Just don't do anything. Just do nothing. Just don't go to the cupboard. Don't go to the store. Sit on the couch, relax, laugh at it. So that's all you got today, right? You're not me. I'm the boss. You're the village idiot. You don't see the big picture. You don't care if I have diabetes and cancer. You couldn't care less. All you care about is the potato chips. Then the third approach, which can work, but it's incomplete. Because what happens when you get abstinent, your stuff comes up, you're sitting on the couch, you're not doing anything, you're not going to get the potato chips, and that distress comes up, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to meet and greet it? So that's where focusing or parts work or somatic experiencing work or really good therapy comes in, where you learn how to titrate your experience of that activation in your nervous system so that you can say, something in me is feeling really upset. Something in me is feeling very fearful. Something in me is having flashbacks or whatever. And there's processes, I call it the ABCs, I can teach them if you want, of how to meet and greet it. And then all of a sudden you realize that there's this relationship forming between the self and the body, the soul and the body, and now you're on your way. Now you're on your way. And so I think that was an answer to your question, was it? Oh yeah, how do we, what's the future look like? The future looks like that.
Yeah.
That's
It's a
what the
blend.
future looks like.
Yeah, it's a blend, right? It's a blend of parts work and internal family systems and all these different ways of being, because the first approach of being powerless over everything, it's really tough. And I look at even in my book I talk about resilience and recovery. It's part of the healing process. I mean, that's what I'm talking about, folks. It can't be powerless. You have to tap into that power a lot of times and be like, I'm powerful and I'm going to decide not to do this. And now I understand, like, people may argue, well, if you're shooting fentanyl or doing crystal meth, it's like, I'm not talking about that stage of the recovery journey. That's another, that could be hospitalization. But I'm talking about at the stage where you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this. It's like, no, you're not going to do this. You're going to stick to your plan. You're going to find that resilience and recovery. You're going to find that part of yourself and talk to it. And talk to that. Maybe it's that stubborn, that child that just wants to be seen, it wants to be heard, and just comforting and stop abandoning that part of yourself. And so I like the blend modality, which, like, if we're not doing that in 2024, 25, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's the whole point of like my podcast. It's like I'm bringing experts on, like Florence, to talk about different ways of healing and different ways of being. And sugar is just one that, wow, it's just there. Food is just there and it's available. Can you tell us about the ABCs, though? I'm curious about that.
I'd love to. So it's super, super simple. So one of my very favorite modalities, very little known, it's called focusing, and it was invented, I don't know if that's the right word, created by a man named Dr. Gene Genlin, who was a psychotherapist and professor at the University of Chicago. And he died years and years ago, long before there was an internet and podcast. But if he was alive today, mark my word, Jesse, it would be as popular as IFS. So basically, he discovered that in psychotherapy, some people got better and some people didn't. Some interventions, psychotherapeutic interventions, were successful and others weren't. And then he got graduate students and he studied, like, what's the thing? What's the thing that seems to be the success factor or factors? So about dozens and dozens of students over many, many, many years were studying it. And they finally figured out it wasn't the therapist. It wasn't the modality. It wasn't the fit. All of that was more or less statistically not significant. There was only one thing that was significant. And it was this little moment in the client's dialogue. You could hear it as they were listening to the tapes of these therapy sessions. There was a moment where the client became speechless and started to stutter, and they're like, it's like, and he's like, what's that? Because every client that, according to the client and the therapist and sort of data metrics, like hard data to sort of suggest that this was a successful intervention, they took all that and put those people in a category, and every single one of them had these moments in their therapy where they were grasping for words, and they're like, what's that? Whatever that is, that's the piece. And he called it focusing. Inner focusing is where you drop in to try and get a felt sense of what is that inside me? What's emerging fresh right now? What is that insight? What is that hidden unconscious thing that's coming to my conscious awareness? And how do I meet and greet it in a way that allows it to feel safe, that it will stay, and that I'm comforting, and we can have a conversation so I can learn what it needs and how to integrate it. So the process is ABC. A, well, first you get sort of calm and grounded and present. So you take 3 breaths and you become present, relaxed, and then you drop in, and then you do is there anything, you can ask, one of Jean's favorite questions was, is there anything that stands between me and feeling joyful right now, feeling peaceful right now, feeling happy right now, feeling just fine right now? and then to see what sort of surfaces. And those are called felt senses, and those are trailheads. The sensations take us into the unconscious world where our thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and behaviors, well, maybe not so much behaviors, but sometimes live. And those are the ones, the negative ones, the limiting ones, the ones that we picked up from our culture, got passed down from ancestors, or we experienced in our life. And then you do the ABCs. You acknowledge it. Something in me is feeling, and you search for the word, and then it might be distressed, and then you say, is that correct? And the felt sense or the part will say close. It's not distressed, I'm whatever. And you start that experience of connecting to some part that's holding discomfort, distress, some sort of insight, something. And you don't know what it is. It's always murky. If it's not murky, if it's not mysterious, if you think you know what it is, you're not doing the right work, right? That's the head jumping in to say, I got the answers. Pick me, I got it, right? No, we're dropping into the body. It's somatic work. The B, so the A is acknowledging, accepting, appreciating. Thank you. I see you. And then the B stands for just be with it. Don't try and make it go away. Don't try and fix it. Just be a friend. Just hold space. Be the empathic witness. And then the C is with calm curiosity, start to ask questions to see if you're understanding correctly. And you just listen, ABCs. And then eventually you can do the C. The final C is conversation. Some of our parts will go there quickly, and some of them it will be months, maybe weeks of sort of connecting before you could say, so what's your earliest memory of feeling that way? Right? And then you can go into the memory and you can say, if there was something in that moment in time that could have come in and changed the outcome, or if there's something I can do now and come back and be with you, what would you need? And those parts will tell us. And then we can heal these deep unconscious patterns that are literally running the show, and we have no idea. I mean, we know so much now about how to heal the stuff in our unconscious. It's so exciting. We're so lucky as addicts. We're so lucky as people who have no choice now at this point, because we're also traumatized, stressed, and overwhelmed. We have to do this work, but it's beautiful work, and we have some really good ideas now about how to do it quickly, efficiently, and effectively.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was so simple, and it's profound, to be able to practice that. And what else would there be if there's someone listening? What else is there, that they could go to, and I'm always one to be, when it comes to, 12 steps or rational recovery, and what else is there? Like if someone was listening and they're like, I want some more resources from Florence. What is another really great resource for someone who is like, you know what, I want to start tackling this in 2025. This is like my big thing, my New Year's resolution.
Yes. Another really great approach is the somatic experiencing trauma recovery approach. So I'm just on the tail end of being certified, and it's a completely different approach again. So what it would say is this, that it would say, Jesse, you can have the intention to be abstinent, to sort of let go of the ultra processed foods and become a whole food man, or for me, become a whole food woman. But there might be some moments where you still need to turn to food to bridge you, because you've reached the edge of your capacity to stay present to what's happening in your system, in your nervous system, in your body. And at that point, you might go and eat the potato chips, but do not eat the potato chips unconsciously, mindlessly. Do not disassociate. You eat them slowly, and you notice what you're needing from the chips, and are they bringing it? And then when the chips are done, or whenever you're done with using food to bring the relief, over time, what you notice is that we use food either for stimulation, to give us energy, to override the capacity of our nervous system. We want to go to bed, or we're tired, we want time out, or our to-do list feels overwhelming, and we will use food to give us energy to just do one more push, do a load of laundry, whatever it is, or we'll use it to numb ourselves out. And when you're aware of what's happening and you're not disassociating while you're using food as a bridge, then slowly over time, you need to use food less. And the metric of success is not, was I abstinent today? It was, how present could I stay today to what's happening in my body? How in the present moment could I be, not stuck in the fear of the past, or the fear that what I lived in the past is going to happen in the future, and I'm in this hypervigilant state of a traumatized nervous system. So does that make sense? Did I explain it okay?
It's how I coach people. So yeah, makes perfect sense.
Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be black or white. It doesn't have to be all or nothing abstinence. The metric of success doesn't have to be abstinence. It can be if you do the 12-step program. It can be if you're rational recovery. It can be, but there's other ways of doing it. And some people call it harm reduction. Maybe. I don't think of it that way. I think of it as you're consciously choosing to lean into something that's effective and brings relief, no longer to dissociate, but to just hold you steady till you can come back to your somatic work, which is where you connect to your senses, the present moment, and you resource yourself again so that you don't have to override your nervous system or collapse into a numb state.
Yeah, the present moment reveals everything. You know, if you stay with the present moment, it's all there. And
It's all there.
it's just hard to be there for long periods of time. So
it is at first, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, getting a really good guide and someone to help and to take that journey with you. In the beginning, you might have to do it alone, though, and that's just how life is sometimes. You know, you have to journey alone. But if you listen this far into this podcast, hopefully, you're going to reach out and hire Florence or go attend one of her summits or something, and be able to read a book or even, you know, just be with yourself and be present and honor those parts of you. They're there for a reason. Like they're all there for a reason. Every part of me that is judging that person, projecting on this person, or as an internal hurt, that's my experience. Like honor that and be with it and see and notice and be curious. And I think that's so profound to be able to do that. And yeah, so I'm really curious about, like, what are you looking to manifest and bring about right now? What are you most excited about manifesting, bringing on your life?
Oh my God, that never get that question. I love that law of attraction question. I am manifesting time off, Jesse, time off. Yeah, so I'm only running one program in the new year. It's a 6-month women, food, and trauma course. And I'm just, that's it. I usually run multiple. I'm doing boot camp. I'm doing that. Like, no, I am slowing down. I want to do more meditation. I'm doing much deeper work than every year. It just gets deeper. It just gets better. There's so much more to discover in the inner world. So I'm stepping back to do more of that for myself. I am working with a company that wants to publish a book. So a book deal would be great. So because there isn't really a book that talks about sugar addiction from some of the angles that I cover, I think. So those two things I would say.
Wow, that's amazing. I love those two things. Like that's what I'm finding. A lot of people are really burnt out at the end of this year. It was a tough year. So I love that plan. And I love that you're coming out with a book. Yeah, please, like get all this stuff in a book so we can listen to it and we can read it. And that'd be fantastic. Yeah. We'll get you back on the show too when you get the book. Great. Whenever it is. Yeah, I want to bring you back on. We'll promote the book. So that'd be really exciting.
Yeah. It was a real pleasure, Jesse, to have somebody who can track this, that you get this, that there's not, I'm on a fair number of podcasts, but not everyone can go this deep. So it was a real pleasure to be able to just go this deep and not feel like I'm going to lose you or sound like, I don't know, like I'm not making sense.
Oh, I was with you the whole time. I was like, wow, we could have went on for another hour easy. So we'll definitely have you back on again. We'll do a round 2. We'll dive in. It's such a fascinating topic, and just thank you for dedicating your life to this work. And it's so important. And I'm so excited to share this episode out. I think it's so timely. And so, Florence, thank you so much for this episode. And and tell people how they can reach you. Like, how can they work with you? Where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah, you can just go to florencechristophers.com. And I will say that I actually feel that at this time in history, we either have to wake up and start doing this work or we're going to get hammered. And this work is beautiful. It seems so scary and intimidating. It's simple. And there's lots of people who have skills that can sort of guide you, teach you the skills that you can get into the present moment. And once you're there, all your answers are there. They're not outside. But the support that you might need from outside is just to get you to be able to connect to the inside where your answers are. And beyond that, it's all, you've got it from there. So I just feel like I don't know if this is like a wake-up call, but we got to do this work. Whether you have an addiction or not, it's all humans have to do this work. We're all carrying way too much stress and trauma and overwhelm, and we're all eating too much junk food, and we all need to get out into nature more and slow down. And this is like, we do it or we are going to suffer. So what we shared today is kind of the path out of that, and not just out of the pain, but truly into a future that can be tremendously pleasurable and exciting.
I love it. Well said. I love ending on that note. That's so great. Yeah. Florence, thank you so much for coming on the show. Can't wait to share this message with the world and have another conversation real soon.
Sounds good. Bye, Jesse.
Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs of Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.